Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our Ivanti webinar with Forrester, with Steve Turner. We're super excited to have a fireside chat about all things zero trust. We really want to get to the truth. We want to separate zero trust fact from fiction. We want to recognize some of the pitfalls that people may face as they navigate their zero trust journey and really just see how we can help to support you as you navigate your road to zero trust and all things improved security from that perspective. So I'm Crystal Miceli. I'm with Ivanti. I head up our solutions marketing team. And with me is Steve Turner of Forrester. Steve, would you like to give a little bit of background about yourself?
Absolutely, and thank you, Crystal, for having me here today. So, hello everyone, Steve Turner. I'm a security and risk analyst here at Forrester. I cover zero trust, network analysis and visibility, ransomware, and a whole host of other areas that back into those topics. And I'm super happy to be here today to help kind of dispel, some of the myths out there that people hear around zero trust.
Well, that's perfect. Thank you so much for joining us, Steve. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about fact and fiction. So I think a good question to start with might be, what is there that's considered an indisputable fact about zero trust that you could share with us?
Yeah. So there's definitely a couple things in this area, right? So the first thing that I'd really like to call out is that everybody out there thinks that their security posture needs to be perfect in order to start down their zero trust journey. That can be further from the truth. The other thing that kind of goes hand in hand with that is that folks have this impression that they need to know anything and everything about their environment in order to get started down that journey. There is such thing, when you're pursuing this journey towards zero trust, having a good enough understanding of all of the assets within your environment, where all of your critical data is, what your identity posture looks like. Again, those areas don't need to be perfect for you to pursue or start going down that journey. And I think that's the biggest thing that I hear from a lot of our end users that we serve here at Forrester is that I've gotten the excuse of like, we're not mature enough for zero trust. It's like, whoa, hold the phone. Security maturity and pursuing a zero trust security model are not, directly, relative to each other, or they're not reliant on each other for you to do both of those things, and even having both of those things as separate initiatives. But the one thing that I do want to spell out is that zero trust can help accelerate you maturing a number of different areas that maybe your organization hasn't even looked at or is currently immature around.
Yeah, that's a really great point. You were sort of talking about some of those assumptions that people make about what needs to be in place to get started. Are people making the assumption that that getting started is not something that they'll ever be ready to do?
Yeah. I mean, you're keying into exactly what we hear from people is that they think that they'll never be ready to go down this journey. And again, there's so much that you can be doing today to really, bolster that journey or get started down that journey. There's a whole host of different activities, a whole host of different things that you can tap into to at least get things started, get things kicked off. Again, you don't have to wait for perfect or wait for that magical unicorn security person that you're seeking out to kind of, draw out what that strategy looks like for you. There's very easy things that you can get started with.
So that's sort of looking at the side of the people who are trepidatious, that they think it's just too big of something for them to consume, right? What about people on the flip side? You have people who maybe believe in the fiction that they can just buy zero trust and it'll be easy.
Yeah, I mean, so like when we look at that, right, there's a lot of technologies, processes, things that people have within their organization today that they can utilize to get started down that journey. So one of the things that we tapped into earlier that I mentioned was this idea of your identity posture. We see identity as a very critical piece to folks' zero trust journeys where if they're not doing a very good job around understanding what identities they have at play, both machine identities, people identities, everything in between, um, you know, basically looking at how they're governing those identities and the identity life cycle that kind of goes around all of that, those are very easy places to start. If you don't have, for example, an automated joiner leaver process today, that's something that you can get started on, because zero trust is all about that idea of understanding who's at play and who's able to access what within your organization, and then enforcing things like least privilege on who can access what. Those are easy areas to get started. There's no perfection that's required to start looking at those things, or even simple things like when we talk about assessing the vulnerabilities that are outstanding within your organization and understanding what your device posture looks like. If you don't have a vulnerability management program today, or you're not kind of assessing what your security hygiene looks like, and there's a bunch of patches that you haven't rolled out from 10 years ago that are actively being exploited in the wild, that's another area of opportunity that you can bake into your overall zero trust strategy. Again, lowering, the attack surface that adversaries out there can take advantage of. And again, backing into all of those zero trust principles. If you want to hop over to actually slide 2 real quick, we see that, these are the zero trust principles that we see a lot of people key in on, right? And they utilize these principles to build out their strategy, the projects that they're pursuing, argue for additional maybe people resources, technology resources to build out different processes within the organization to enforce these principles. Because in a zero trust world, we're starting from a default deny posture and building up that trust to our assets, people, and ultimately access to applications and data. And we're backing into the principles of that all entities are untrusted by default, least privilege access is enforced, and comprehensive security monitoring is implemented within your organization. And all of those things can only be enabled by maturing a bunch of the technologies and capabilities that you have within your organization to be able to assess risk, to be able to assess device posture, and then grant access based on all of those things.
That's something that's really interesting to me. I want to drill into a little bit. One of the things that Ivanti does is we bring together zero trust and patch management and endpoint management and service management to sort of address that comprehensive need of securing the enterprise. So zero trust is part of that bigger puzzle, but it's something that we're finding that customers may adopt in partnership with some of the other technologies, like addressing the vulnerabilities at the same time. How would you suggest that someone prioritize when they've got all of these opportunities for improvement in the way that they secure their data and their applications and their network and their, the users that access all of those resources? How do they prioritize with all of those options on the table?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I wish more organizations would actually ask that question, because they hop, feet first or head first into implementing technology within the organization, but they're not building against anything, or they're not prioritizing appropriately. So the biggest things that I advise organizations when they come to us and start talking about where they're at in the journey is to take a step back. Do a gap assessment within your organization to understand when it comes to identity or people, when it comes to workload security, network security, device security, data security, and the visibility into all of those different things, and the ability to automate responses within all of those different domains. Where do you sit there? Where are you really mature, and where do you have no capability at all or minimal capability? And then if there's a particular area that you're extremely mature on, or mature in, you can build off of that. You can build into those other areas and use that as your launching point, because you're mature there already, right? You've got really mature capabilities. And you can utilize that as your jumping off point to, for example, let's say that you have a mature identity posture. You can use that to understand, who's authenticating and who you're authorizing to access things within your organization. And then you can start bringing in context around devices and understanding what the device posture looks like and pulling that into your access decisions. It's not rocket science for some of these things, but the problem is that, having been a former practitioner, you get so down in the weeds when you're implementing a variety of different technologies that things could be, right in your face, but you're so in the nuanced, pieces of implementing said technology that, you forget to take a step back and look at the holistic picture. So if there's an area that you're really mature in, build out from that into whatever the next strategic area that you believe is going to address maybe a organizational use case that is going to be backed into some business goal or some security goal. That's what I recommend for most folks.
One of the things that we've been focusing on at Ivanti is helping customers map that cybersecurity journey. So starting from that place of strength, but then using common frameworks like CIS or NIST to help them sort of plot that route forward, and including the adoption of zero trust in there. How do you feel about leveraging frameworks in that way? Is that something you're seeing a lot?
Frameworks are the best way to assess exactly where you are and help plot your roadmap. If you could actually hop over to slide 3, because I think this would be really good background for kind of what we're talking about, is, when a lot of folks are plotting their roadmap, right? So at Forrester, we have the ZTX framework, which is a framework for helping you up level on a number of these capabilities and domains that I mentioned. But that framework is designed to be used hand in hand with some of the things that you mentioned, Crystal. So like, NIST has their cybersecurity framework that's used pretty universally across the industry to measure a variety of different security capabilities. But, then there's the CIS frameworks and everything that fits underneath that umbrella. These are all great tools to help leverage to build out what that plan looks like for maturing all of those domains and getting particular capabilities that you may not have today. One other framework I want to call into this discussion because it helps with the visibility and response side of things is the MITRE ATT&CK framework or their defense framework, which allows you to understand the tactics and techniques that adversaries are using out there and build the appropriate controls and processes to be able to address when those things show up within your organization or to be able to even understand if they show up within your organization. Because a lot of folks that don't build against those frameworks have these gigantic visibility gaps. And then they find out much, much later when it's already too late that they've been compromised and they don't have the appropriate detection or response capabilities.
I think that's a really interesting point. It actually raises a question for me in terms of pitfalls, right? What are some of the most common pitfalls along the journey that people tend to fall into?
Yeah, so if you could hop probably to the second to last slide that we have here, there's a couple of different areas where we see folks really struggle with, right? So I'm going to start with the first decision where, there's a lot of organizations get analysis paralysis when they're talking about this, is weighing in on whether the existing tech that they have, they've probably picked a whole bunch of point solutions over time that for whatever reasons, that some they probably can't even remember at this point. Or they're, looking to basically throw out whatever they've done from a point solution standpoint and go with one of these portfolio players out here that offers a whole host of different tools and technology that can serve, in replacement of some of those best in breed point solutions. The thing that I'd argue is that both of these things have a place. You don't have to throw out one for the other, and you don't have to make a decision one way or the other. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing that I'd say to those organizations is that you do need a North Star within your organization. You need that source of truth that at the end of the day, where are you going to be going to correlate all of this information that we're talking about? Where are you going to be going to ultimately make those access decisions and then push out enforcement to a bunch of other different tools and technology that you have within your organization? The next piece of this, and if you could just bounce to the next slide after this, is there's a bunch of other areas that we see people struggling with. And Krista, I think you hit the nail on the head when you were talking about the frameworks, right? Most organizations that we talk to have not done a capability mapping across their organization. So they're like going headfirst into this zero trust journey, but they don't even know what they have. They don't even know what they can see. They don't even know whether or not they can restrict access across the organization or pare down that access based on assessing risk, because they don't have those capabilities, or they don't know that they have those capabilities. So I think your advice that kind of Ivanti and we at Forrester also happen to be in alignment with, is that frameworks are a very good opportunity for you to map out your capabilities across your organization and understand exactly what you have. Now, that being said, a lot of these things kind of go hand in hand, right? Because we see a lot of organizations, and this is beginning to get a little bit better out there. We see a lot of organizations struggle with building out that overall zero trust architecture. But the problem here is that there's traditionally been a very large lack of guidance out there on what this even looks like. What does a zero trust architecture look like? What are there reference architectures that organizations can utilize in order to build this out? I'd say that that's pretty lacking kind of across the board. It's getting better. The federal government has been driving a lot of initiatives to get at least public guidance out there for a lot of the public agencies that are out there. But these are things that organizations can lean on in order to at least get started and understand what zero trust architecture actually looks like. And then the two other things that I'd point out when we're talking about challenges that organizations are having is this broad-based understanding of what zero trust looks like. Now, this is probably why, Crystal and I started earlier with kind of defining zero trust and talking about some of the key points that folks should build against. But I think we as an industry, haven't laser focused on one particular definition of what zero trust is. And so that's caused a lot of confusion out there. And it's, we still get, a lot of questions from end users where they come to us and say, well, NIST says this, but then CISA says this, but, the vendor that I'm working with says that it's this. I thought that zero trust was just another way of saying least privilege. It gets really confusing really quickly. So what I'd advise here for organizations is define what zero trust means to you and get very laser focused on that and make sure that you're building against that understanding. Don't let all of these other things cloud the discussion, because you as an organization need to collectively agree on what principles you're building out against and what the collective understanding of what zero trust means to you ultimately means. And then the last thing that I want to talk about really quickly is that organizations that approach this as a typical security or IT project, every single one of them that I've talked to that's approached it from that standpoint, their zero trust initiative or strategy has completely failed. And they're coming to us in order to understand how they can reboot it, get, things back on track. And a lot of the times where we find out the reason that it failed was because they were designing it just like every other IT or security project out there. They were just deploying technology with no rhyme or reason, and because security or IT said so. You need organizational understanding and buy-in around zero trust, because there's processes and business technology that needs to be incorporated as part of the approaches that you're taking. It can't be treated like an IT or security project, because you will have accomplished nothing, at the end of the day, other than really upsetting people within the organization and giving zero trust an extremely bad name, just like the rest of the technology that you've probably deployed in that way.
That raises a question for me. I know this is not one we planned on talking about, but I'm going to raise it because it's near and dear to my heart. And that's about how do you integrate zero trust security with like DevSecOps, right?
Yeah.
That it's just really interesting to me the shift to to incorporate security planning, at the very conception of the software development lifecycle, and how important it is to have that be considered throughout, and not just sort of as a checkpoint at the end. Is that
Oh
something?
my God. I'm first of all, I'm super happy that you asked that because, and I know we weren't planning on discussing that, but it so fits into this, right? The whole idea of like just kind of DevOps in general, like let's take the DevSecOps piece out of it for a moment. DevOps in general is about iterating quickly, right? And just kind of, you know what, if something doesn't work, we're going to iterate on like the next iteration that we're coming out with is going to address that. But we're also going to build a backlog of things that we still want to address, or net new features, or net new functionality, or maybe potential bug fixes and everything. That's an awesome process. That doesn't fit the traditional IT or security mold, right? Like, they push back heavily. Like, if you ever told them, like, you could just iterate on this tomorrow, or, you know what, that didn't work out, we could just quickly fix this. It's like, no, 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 we need a whole nother deployment in order to fix this, or we need buy-in from everybody in order to deploy a net new thing in order to make this happen. I think that zero trust and what you're talking about around DevOps and DevSecOps, there's a very natural mold there. Because when we talk about kind of what day 366 looks like with, a zero trust deployment or anything like that, zero trust isn't something that you just deploy once and then you walk away from it and you say, job's done. Zero trust is constantly about evolving and evaluating and finding new sources of data and new control points within your organization to remove friction wherever possible. But at the end of the day, be able to secure your organization appropriately with so much more visibility and control, again, without impacting business folks, right? Because that's what the whole DevOps, like SDLC, like life cycle is about, is iterating quickly for the better, to improve things and to make things work appropriately. I think that was like kind of the perfect tie-in for what we're talking about here today.
Something that I was thinking about the other day is the fact that we're so focused at Ivanti on not just security, but also the experience and the productivity of users who access technology in an organization. And, I know zero trust is obviously, a great way to protect all of the resources, but I think it's also a way to positively impact the employee experience of technology in an organization so that they have easier, streamlined means to get to the things that they need to access, regardless of what device they're coming in from, regardless of where they happen to be in the what Vivanti calls the everywhere workplace, right? What do you think about that flip side of it? Is that something you also see as a benefit of zero trust from a user's point of view?
Oh, 1,000%. So if you want to hop over to slide 4, there's actually like a really interesting survey that we had done internally here at Forrester. Well, it's actually our annual security survey where we survey a number of security leaders kind of out there in the field. This particular survey I pulled, where we surveyed just general workforce people that may not be aware of kind of what's going on within the organization until they're trying to get their job done. So something I really want to call out around this that I think totally kind of sets the stage for some of what we're talking about right now is we asked people who are just trying to get their jobs done, why do you sometimes ignore or go around your organization's security policies? And I think it's really, really telling that the top 2 responses by far were, 1, it was the most efficient way of getting what they needed to get done. And when we talk about, at Forrester, we call it the anywhere work model, or the future of work model. That's super telling. And then the second thing, which was, at the same percentage, was they needed to interact with peers outside of their organization, and security policies were getting in the way of them doing that. So that, beyond the existing security approaches not protecting our organizations adequately today, they're also getting in the way of people actually getting their jobs done. So if you hop over actually to the next slide, Zero Trust improves that experience quite heavily, kind of across the board. I mean, when we look at traditional VPNs, right, where all of an organization's traffic is backhauled through one place, through the mothership, as I like to say, that creates a poor experience for a lot of folks. But the alternative, when you're still using those VPN devices, is shooting that traffic outside of that VPN connection, and now you don't have any visibility into what's going on. While, yes, you're providing a better user experience, but you lost on a whole bunch of other fronts. So the natural evolution of that is something like Zero Trust Network Access that allows and fits into that anywhere work model, because it's not reliant on backhauling everything back to the mothership. It's not reliant on all of your users having to use this legacy approach to connecting to the applications that they care about to get their jobs done. And then there's a whole host of other things that just overall improve the user experience. We know passwords are very, very vulnerable, right? I mean, every day, I'd imagine this probably happens to you, because I know it happens to me, even though I work in security. I can't go a single day without getting an email that something that I've used has been breached, my username, password, and whatever associated data was exposed. Passwords are the weak link. A lot of folks out there use the same password across a bunch of different services. And, it makes me cringe, like as somebody who's in security. But, we haven't made it easy for folks, so one of the other things that backs into the Zero Trust model is moving to something like passwordless authentication, where, again, you're delighting from a user experience front. They don't have to remember a litany of different passwords in order to access applications within their organization. And at the same time, they have to just click approve, or they have to plug in a token. There's a number of different methods that they can utilize where it just makes it that much more seamless and much easier to work, in a lot of organizations. And then two other fronts that at the end of the day should be kind of invisible or seamless to the user is this idea of moving away from these legacy management models and this legacy approach to securing devices, where we're consolidating where possible and using more modern management methods that allow folks to pick whatever device they want to bring to work that they work the best on, and increases the performance on those devices because they don't have 20 different security agents running in the background that they probably didn't even know about anyway, but they just probably blamed IT because they were having such a poor experience. So there's a litany of different ways that Zero Trust kind of can back into that employee experience side of things, where it's just, again, the idea is when you implement, a Zero Trust architecture, it should be seamless to the folks that don't work in IT and security at the end of the day.
I was thinking the other day about the fact that, we do so much on our mobile devices, right? But the landscape of the mobile device and your ability to really consume everything that's presented to you on that, that small format could result in, the activities that you do on those mobile devices being more risky because you're just not able to take in all the information, with that small scale. We've actually got a number of customers that are pairing Ivanti Access using zero sign-on with mobile threat defense. So you can sort of better secure some of the behaviors of things that are happening on those mobile devices, at least making sure that they've got, the strong passwords and the, the latest OS version. Right. So the behaviors that they're executing on those mobile devices in the real world that are, on a device that's also connecting to corporate resources is a little bit less risky.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, making it as seamless as possible and being able to assess kind of that device posture in real time across the board to inform, how folks are accessing things is super critical when we talk about, implementing things like Zero Trust Access.
Yeah. So we were talking a little bit about that experience from an employee's point of view. Yeah, I think that nowadays, people are, I think they're just assuming that there's just tons and tons and tons of data being collected on everything that they do, down to the smallest detail. Is that necessary for zero trust, and does that pose any kind of concerns from a privacy standpoint?
So that's a great question. Unfortunately, I still get those questions where I think a lot of people conflate the idea and the wording zero trust probably doesn't help with this, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of people conflate the idea of zero trust that we're not trusting the people or the employees themselves, and that couldn't be further from the truth. While we are collecting, a lot of telemetry kind of around risky behaviors and understanding what devices and users and everything's doing kind of across the organization. The idea is that we're not diving into that in such intimate detail where we're tracking, like, for example, what Steve is doing, down to the finite detail. He visited these web pages. He went to Facebook for 25 minutes yesterday. He's so risky, like, within the organization. But we're not doing that. And that's not the idea behind implementing something like this. If you're implementing, a zero trust architecture properly, somebody within your organization shouldn't even be able to correlate that, themselves, because they would be limited from a privilege standpoint. And some alarm bells should go off in your organization if they're going down to the minutia of, like, an individual user and looking at something like their browsing history in intimate detail. Zero trust is not this idea of not trusting the employee. It's about building trust within your organization and making sure that employees trust that their information is protected, your customers' information is protected. Because again, at the end of the day, one of the principles that we're backing into is least privilege access and having that paired with comprehensive security monitoring. So it's not an employee monitoring program, like, no matter what anybody calls it or no matter what anybody says. But I know in this day and age, that's a top of mind concern. I know it certainly is for me. So, I'd recommend that organizations make that very clear, as they revise probably their security policies, as they pursue a zero trust architecture and their overall zero trust strategy, so that employees understand what you are collecting and what you aren't collecting around their usage within your company's, corporate internet and intranets.
So then definitely CISO shouldn't go in front of an employee base at a town hall and say, our new policy is trust no one.
No, that's probably not the best phrase to use, and
Right.
I personally am not a fan of it because of the exact reasons that we're talking about here.
So thinking about, you were mentioning earlier that day 366, what's that look like, right? You've been through this. Let's reverse engineer that a little bit. And when I'm thinking about, someone who's considering adopting, a zero trust architecture, and they want to make the business case for, starting on that journey, what are some of the things, some of the key outcomes and benefits that they should use to help justify that and get that investment?
Yeah, so that's a very top of mind question that we get quite frequently. So one thing that I'd recommend, and a lot of security practitioners that I talk to, unfortunately don't have this knowledge. And if they don't have this knowledge, please go and sit with some of the business people within your organization. Understanding what your overall organization's goals are is so incredibly critical to being able to build a list of outcomes that makes sense from a security standpoint, and being able to get the budget dollars and buy-in around something as large and transformational as zero trust. Now, there's a couple of organizations out there that I've seen even include as part of their investor presentations that zero trust is enabling their digital transformation journeys, allowing them to serve customers better, helping build up that customer trust in a very competitive landscape. But that those organizations out there are the outliers, like compared to most other organizations. What I'd recommend is that CISOs, security leaders, security practitioners who are probably boots on the ground, having to implement a lot of this, should sit with their business leaders and understand their organizational goals overall very, very well. Maybe an organization is looking to do a lot of mergers and acquisitions in the next few quarters or over the next 2 to 3 years. Maybe there's a large migration to the cloud coming up in order for the business to become more agile and be able to turn around new deals more quickly. Those are things that are prime opportunities to back in your zero trust strategy around. So like we were talking about earlier about how zero trust improves the employee experience. Very similar things can be applied to the customer experience. You can use all of those different business outcomes that the organization's trying to get at the end of the day to also be outcomes or spin-off projects as part of your zero trust project plan or zero trust strategy to enable those things to happen. So as long as you're tying those things very directly to those organizational goals and then boiling it down, I've seen OKRs be utilized to do this, agile methodology to tie it, back to those overall goals or organizational initiatives. There's so many different ways you can do this, but understanding the business landscape within your organization is so hypercritical. And, while I bank probably a lot of CISOs understand that in and out, if you're a security practitioner and you're watching this presentation, or you're a security architect, or you even sit in your security operations center thinking that you can't have an impact on something like this, go and talk to your manager, go and talk to somebody to see if you can sit with those business people to understand what they do day to day and use that to tie back the things that you're looking to implement and how it's going to help them get their job done at the end of the day.
I think that's great advice for anybody in any discipline.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I know we're talking about security, folks, but understanding what your organization is doing and how they make money and how they serve customers, I think that that's something that gets put by the wayside too often, again, because we're all in the weeds trying to get our jobs done. But backing out, a couple lenses and seeing kind of that macro way that things are getting done can probably make you a better employee and also probably bolster your career goals and understanding exactly where you want to go.
Read the room.
Yes, amen.
So once you've got that investment, you've made your business case and everyone's all in, what's your advice in terms of vendor evaluation and looking at the solutions available on the market?
So if we hop over to the next slide after this, I know we talked about, kind of a zero trust roadmap and building your project plan and everything like that. Now, something that I want to dial into that you called out, Crystal, which I think is a great way of describing this, is your project plan should be very outcomes based, right? And so using those outcomes to lay out what that roadmap looks like ultimately under that project plan will help you also spell out in nuance underneath each of these outcomes what capabilities you're looking for. What do you need in order to be able to execute on to deliver that outcome? So when you're evaluating vendors out there in the space, you need to understand how are they going to help you deliver that outcome. I would bring those outcomes to the table when you're talking to those vendors, when you're POCing these things. I think a lot of folks, and I'm certainly guilty of this, as like having done this previously, is a lot of folks spell out all of the nuanced technical capabilities that they have. They're not having a conversation with a vendor as if they're going to be partnering with them at the end of the day to help deliver on whatever their business goals are or their security goals are. So spelling out what that outcome is to the vendor as well as listing out a bunch of must-haves, because there are going to always be technology must-haves, whether it's a regulatory requirement, compliance requirement, or it's just an organizational requirement that you have. I think those things should be paired with each other to be able to have a productive conversation with that vendor and understand and evaluate exactly how they're helping you deliver that outcome. The other thing that I'd caution, and I think we talked about this kind of in detail, but not necessarily through this lens earlier, is when you're talking to a vendor, if they tell you that by buying into everything that they have is going to deliver ZT or zero trust for you, I would almost argue that you should boot that vendor out of the room immediately, because they're selling you snake oil that it just doesn't exist. There isn't anybody out there that's delivering this all packaged up and ready for you to kind of deploy within your organization. I'd ask, those vendors how they're backing into a variety of different zero trust principles that we talked about earlier. And I'd ask them how they're backing into that definition of zero trust that we've laid out. If your organization has something very specific on how they're defining those principles or zero trust, I'd ask them how they back into that and how they help support pieces of that. If they can't answer those questions, or if they can't answer what capabilities they're bringing to the table, I think that'll give you a pretty good idea of whether they fit into your overall security ecosystem or not.
One of the things that I've found when in my past evaluating solutions is that a lot of people come to the table with a prescription on how to solve their problem, and they're just looking narrowly at the products available on the market based on some predefined assumptions in their head about how you get there.
Yes.
Would you advise that people sort of be open to, routes to solving the problem that may be different, may challenge their status quo?
That's I know I keep saying, but that's such an awesome call out, because so you're 1,000% right, like probably 2,000% right on what you just called out there, because so we were talking about VPN earlier, VPN to ZTNA. I couldn't tell you how many organizations I've talked to here at Forrester who said it has to fit this exact paradigm in order to work within our environment. And it's like, hold the phone here. So we're talking about you implementing zero trust, but it has to be within these guidelines of how you're doing security today. I don't think that those things match up. And I think if you're not open to new ideas or new ways of approaching things, or new ways that could potentially scale a lot better than probably how you're doing things today, I think you're shooting yourself in the foot. I think you're not doing yourself any favors. We were talking about the DevOps or DevSecOps model earlier and being able to iterate quickly. There's a reason you're having a conversation with the vendor today, right? Like, whatever you have today is not solving your problem. And if you know how to solve the problem today, and the stuff you have internally isn't doing it, you need to come to the table with a much more open mindset to understand, okay, these are my security requirements. Like, these are the things, like things need to be encrypted, or, it needs to support multi-factor authentication. Those are okay. And I think those are okay requirements to still have. But saying how you want it exactly done pigeonholes you into the ways you've done things in the past. I don't think that we should try to carry over the sins of the past to solve the problems of the future, if that makes any sense. So I think exactly what you're talking about, everybody should come to the table with an open mind, because crazy idea out there, but other people have points of view, and having those additional points of view and the diverse points of view could end up solving your problem in a lot better way than with the existing information, how you've laid it out.
Best example I've ever encountered of that is when I ordered a drink at a restaurant and asked for 5 limes. And instead of bringing me 5 limes, they brought me a small carafe of lime juice. They solved my problem in a much more effective way.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great analogy.
So tell me, Steve, what do you have coming up? What's going on with the future of research in this area over the coming months?
Yeah. So there's a few different things that we're doing here at Forrester to kind of build out the research in response to what we're hearing from end users, right? So there's some evaluative research that we have coming up around zero trust extended platforms to understand. Again, we were talking about that North Star earlier that your organization wants to kind of focus in on to be able to be your single source of truth, but also be able to orchestrate a lot of the things that we've been talking about today. So we're doing a number of different evaluative pieces, around that. But also, like I mentioned, besides zero trust, I cover ransomware and a bunch of other areas. We're continuing to build out our research portfolio around the best ways to defend against ransomware. Talking about how everything that maybe you're already doing around zero trust can fit very naturally into your ransomware defense posture. We get a lot of questions from organizations, just baseline starting with how do I defend against ransomware? And you're like, wait, do you have any more specific questions around that? They're like, no, that's the question. And I'm like, okay. So we're writing a whole host of research around that topic in order to, arm organizations with the information that they need in order to better their ransomware defense posture, including detection, response, and remediation. But in the zero trust realm, we're building out and working on towards building out reference architectures and a whole host of other research to prescriptively arm folks with things like what we were talking about, like a sample zero trust roadmap, but going in that nuanced detail about maybe holistic policies that they can, put in place within an organization, but leaving up kind of to the different technology solutions and organizational specific things for them to go and do on their own, based on kind of that different research that we're doing. But so we're very busy over here.
Very busy, but we'll be watching for all of that. Any sort of parting thoughts that you'd like people to take away?
Yeah. So if you want to hop over to the next slide real quick, I just want to talk about some really quick things. And this is actually research that we're also doing some additional depth into is, I think like we were talking about earlier, if you are not iterating quickly around your security program and the way that you're building out security within your organization, you should start that. You should maintain a backlog of different things that you've identified, but continue moving forward. Don't let those hold you back from bettering security within your organization. And as you implement zero trust, your operational reality is going to change significantly. And myself, David Holmes, and a number of other analysts here at Forrester are doing deep research into this. You're probably going to have to change your organizational structure to match this very integrated nature around zero trust. And then, things like your security operations center, is your superpower to detection and response. That should inform what you're doing. And like Crystal and I have been talking about today, I think the biggest thing that I'm going to leave folks with is that zero trust, as well as whatever your future security posture, security architecture looks like, can be used as your operational efficiency superpower. You can use this to find problems within your organization that are causing users and customers and employees headaches. Use that to not just drive detection and response within your organization, use it to better how folks are using the things that they're trying to use to get their job done at the end of the day, or customers are using to consume your services. Use those things to improve those experiences for folks. But zero trust isn't like just something that you just slam in at the end of the day. It takes a lot of careful thought and planning, but there's a lot of different ways that you can start very, very quickly to start going down that journey.
That is fantastic advice. So thank you again, Steve. This has been an incredibly engaging and interesting session, and it's not quite like anyone that I've heard before. So hopefully people will get a lot out of it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Crystal, for having me. Really appreciate it.
And for those of you who are listening, if you want to learn more about zero trust solutions from Ivanti, you can visit us at avanti.com/solutions/security. We actually have some additional access to research from Forrester and Steve out there. So we encourage you to go check that out. And we have future webinars coming too, where you can learn some more.